President Donald Trump just issued the most extreme ultimatum in modern American history. Speaking to reporters today, March 6, 2026, Trump compared Iran to Imperial Japan in 1945 and demanded that Tehran surrender unconditionally or face complete annihilation. Trump said, and I am quoting his exact words, "Iran needs to do what Japan did in 1945. They need to surrender. Unconditionally, total surrender. No conditions, no negotiations, just surrender. If they don't, we will continue until there is nothing left." Let that sink in. Trump is explicitly comparing the current situation to World War II. And everyone knows what happened in 1945. The United States demanded that Japan surrender unconditionally. Japan refused. And then the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing over 200,000 people instantly and forcing Japan to capitulate. Trump is invoking that exact historical parallel. He is saying, Iran, you are like Japan in 1945. Surrender now, or face destruction so complete that you will have no choice but to surrender later. This is not subtle diplomacy. This is not a negotiating position. This is a threat of total war, potentially even nuclear war, dressed up as a historical lesson. And it has sent shockwaves around the world. Because if Trump is seriously comparing Iran to Japan 1945, then he is suggesting that what comes next, if Iran does not surrender, could be as devastating as what happened to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Is Trump threatening to use nuclear weapons? The White House says no, but Trump's own words say otherwise. Let me walk you through exactly what Trump said today, why the Japan 1945 comparison is so terrifying, what unconditional surrender actually means, and why Iran will never accept it, what Trump's threat of annihilation implies for the next phase of the war, and whether the United States is actually considering the use of nuclear weapons, or whether this is psychological warfare designed to break Iran's will. Because this is the moment when the war shifted from a regional conflict to something far darker and far more dangerous. Trump made his comments during a brief exchange with reporters as he departed the White House for a campaign event in Florida. A reporter asked, "Mr. President, Iran says it will never negotiate under threat of force. How do you respond?" Trump stopped, turned to the camera, and said, "Iran needs to do what Japan did in 1945. They need to surrender, unconditionally, total surrender, no conditions, no negotiations, just surrender. If they don't, we will continue until there is nothing left." They know what happened to Japan. Japan refused to surrender, and then they had no choice. Iran should learn from history. Another reporter shouted, "Are you threatening nuclear weapons, sir?" Trump smiled and said, "I'm not threatening anything. I'm stating facts. Japan learned the hard way. Iran doesn't have to. They can surrender now and save their country, or they can keep fighting and lose everything. It's their choice." And then Trump walked away. That was the entire exchange, less than a minute. But in that minute, Trump invoked the most devastating military action in human history, compared Iran to an enemy that was annihilated into submission, and suggested that if Iran does not surrender, the same fate awaits them. The reaction was immediate and global. Within hours, world leaders were issuing statements condemning Trump's language. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called Trump's comparison deeply troubling and urged restraint. Russia's foreign ministry said Trump's words were nuclear blackmail and warned that such threats could lead to catastrophic escalation. China's foreign minister said the comparison to 1945 was irresponsible and dangerous, and called for immediate de-escalation. Even America's closest allies, including the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, expressed concern. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said, "We support the United States in defending itself and its allies, but we do not support threats of total annihilation. Diplomacy must remain an option." But Trump does not care what world leaders think. Trump has made clear over the past 7 days of this war that he is not interested in international opinion, in UN resolutions, or in the concerns of allies. Trump is prosecuting this war the way he wants, and he is demanding that Iran surrender on his terms. And his terms are unconditional surrender. So what does that actually mean? Unconditional surrender is a term with a very specific historical meaning. It means the defeated party must lay down arms, cease all resistance, and submit completely to the victor's terms without negotiation. The victor dictates everything: the political system, the leadership, the military structure, the economy. The defeated party has no say. It is total capitulation. The United States last demanded unconditional surrender during World War II. Germany surrendered unconditionally in May 1945 after Adolf Hitler's suicide and the fall of Berlin. Japan initially refused to surrender unconditionally even after Germany's defeat. The United States then dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and on Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. Japan surrendered unconditionally on August 15, 1945. That is the parallel Trump is invoking, and it is a parallel that implies the use of overwhelming, catastrophic force if the demand is not met. So what would unconditional surrender mean for Iran? Based on statements from Trump, from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, and from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, here is what the United States would demand if Iran surrendered unconditionally. First, Iran must dismantle its entire nuclear program. All enriched uranium must be transferred out of the country. All centrifuges must be destroyed. All nuclear facilities must be permanently closed. Iran would have no nuclear capability whatsoever, not even for civilian energy. Second, Iran must destroy all ballistic and cruise missiles. Every missile, every launcher, every production facility must be eliminated. Iran would have no missile deterrent. Third, Iran must dissolve the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The IRGC, which controls much of Iran's military and economy, would be disbanded. Its commanders would be arrested and tried. Its assets would be seized. Fourth, Iran must end all support for proxy forces. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, militias in Iraq and Syria, all funding and support must end immediately. Iran would have no regional influence. Fifth, Iran's government must be dissolved. The supreme leader position, which Ayatollah Khamenei held until his death, would be abolished. The Assembly of Experts, the Guardian Council, all religious governance structures would be eliminated. Iran would transition to a secular, democratic government chosen by elections, supervised by the United States. And sixth, Iran must pay reparations. Compensation to the United States for the cost of the war. Compensation to Israel for missile attacks. Compensation to Gulf Arab states for economic damage. The amounts would be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. That is what unconditional surrender means. It means Iran, as it currently exists, would cease to exist. The Islamic Republic would be dissolved. The military would be dismantled. The government would be replaced. And Iran would become effectively a vassal state subject to American supervision. Now ask yourself, is there any scenario in which Iran's leadership accepts those terms? The answer is no. Absolutely not. Iran will never agree to unconditional surrender because it would mean the end of the regime, the humiliation of the nation, and the permanent subjugation to American power. Iran's leaders would rather fight to the death than accept those terms. And that is exactly what Trump is counting on. Trump does not actually expect Iran to surrender. Trump is making an impossible demand so that when Iran refuses, he can justify escalating to even more extreme levels of violence. Trump is setting up a narrative. We gave Iran a chance. We offered them the opportunity to surrender and save their country. They refused. So now we have no choice but to destroy them completely. That is the logic. And it is the same logic that was used in 1945. Japan was given the chance to surrender at Potsdam in July 1945. Japan refused. So the United States dropped atomic bombs. Trump is repeating the script. Demand surrender, get refused, escalate to total destruction. And that brings us to the most terrifying question. Is Trump actually considering the use of nuclear weapons? The official answer from the White House is no. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said in a statement this afternoon, "The president was making a historical comparison, not a threat. The United States has no plans to use nuclear weapons in Iran." But Trump's own words leave the door open. Trump said Iran should learn from history and that Japan learned the hard way. That is a barely veiled reference to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Trump has also repeatedly refused to rule out any military option. When asked directly whether nuclear weapons are on the table, Trump has said, "I never take anything off the table." Secretary of Defense Hegseth has similarly refused to rule out tactical nuclear weapons. When pressed by reporters earlier this week, Hegseth said, "All options are under consideration. We will use whatever force is necessary to achieve our objectives." So while the official position is that nuclear weapons are not planned, the unofficial position is that they are not ruled out. And that ambiguity is intentional. Trump wants Iran to believe that nuclear weapons are a real possibility. He wants Iranian leaders lying awake at night, wondering if an American bomber is going to drop a nuclear bomb on Tehran. He wants the fear of nuclear annihilation to drive Iran to surrender. This is psychological warfare. But there is a risk. The risk is that Trump's threats become self-fulfilling. If Iran believes that the United States is going to use nuclear weapons, Iran might decide to launch a desperate all-out attack before it is too late. Iran might fire every remaining missile at Israel and American bases. Iran might activate Hezbollah to launch all 150,000 rockets at Israeli cities. Iran might conduct terrorist attacks on American soil. Because if Iran believes it is about to be annihilated, Iran has nothing to lose. That is the danger of ultimatums like Trump's. They can provoke the very catastrophe they are meant to prevent. But let us assume, for the moment, that Trump is not planning to use nuclear weapons. Let us assume this is purely psychological warfare. What does annihilation mean in conventional terms? Based on statements from Trump and Pentagon officials, annihilation means the complete destruction of Iran's ability to function as a modern state. It means destroying Iran's electrical grid. Every power plant, every substation, every transmission line. Iran would be plunged into darkness indefinitely. Without electricity, hospitals cannot function. Water treatment plants shut down. Communication networks fail. The government cannot coordinate. The country collapses into chaos. It means destroying Iran's oil infrastructure. Every refinery, every pipeline, every export terminal. Iran's economy is almost entirely dependent on oil revenue. Without oil, Iran cannot pay its military, cannot import food and medicine, cannot sustain itself. The regime would be bankrupted. It means destroying Iran's transportation infrastructure. Every bridge, every highway, every railroad, every airport. Iranian cities would be isolated from each other. The government could not move troops or supplies. The country would be fragmented. It means destroying government facilities. Every ministry building, every command center, every police station, every courthouse, the institutions of the state would cease to exist. And it means killing Iran's leadership systematically, not just the supreme leader who is already dead, but every senior official, every general, every provincial governor, every mayor. The entire political and military class would be eliminated. That is what annihilation looks like without nuclear weapons. It is total war aimed at destroying the state, and it would kill tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of civilians. Because when you destroy a country's power grid, people die. When you destroy water treatment plants, people die from disease. When you destroy hospitals, people die from lack of medical care. When you destroy food distribution systems, people starve. Annihilation is not just a military term. It is a humanitarian catastrophe. And that is what Trump is threatening. He is saying, Iran, surrender now, or we will destroy your country so completely that your people will beg for mercy. But Iran will not surrender. Iran has never surrendered in its modern history. Iran fought an 8-year war with Iraq in the 1980s that killed 1 million people, and Iran did not surrender. Iran has endured decades of crippling sanctions, and it has not surrendered. Iran is not going to surrender now because Donald Trump demands it. So what happens next? If Iran refuses, which it will, Trump will escalate. The next phase of the war, which multiple Pentagon sources say is being planned right now, will involve the systematic destruction of Iran's infrastructure, as I just described. The strikes will intensify, the targets will expand, and the death toll, which is already approaching 1,000 Iranians, will climb into the thousands and then tens of thousands. And at some point, the American public will begin to question whether this is worth it. Already, polls show that support for the war is declining. Gas prices are rising. The cost of the war is mounting. American troops are dying. And now Trump is threatening annihilation. How long before Americans say enough? How long before Congress forces Trump to end the war? Or does Trump's comparison to World War II resonate? Does Trump successfully frame this as a fight against a fanatic regime that, like Imperial Japan, must be defeated totally or not at all? We will find out. But one thing is clear. Trump has crossed a line that no president has crossed since 1945. He has invoked the nuclear destruction of Japan as a model for what he might do to Iran. And whether he is bluffing or not, the world now has to take seriously the possibility that this war could end with an American president authorizing the use of nuclear weapons for the first time in 81 years. Iran must surrender like Japan 1945. Unconditional or annihilation. That is Trump's ultimatum. And Iran's response will determine whether this war ends through capitulation, through negotiation, or through a level of destruction that the world has not seen since the atomic age began. Subscribe and turn on notifications because this war just entered its most dangerous phase. Trump has invoked Hiroshima, and Iran is defiant. The next few days will determine whether Trump's threat was a bluff or whether the world is about to witness something unthinkable. History is repeating, and the outcome could be catastrophic.